Right, greetings, hello. So look, it's the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France, à Creuse, welcoming you again, and we're going to be doing something slightly differently this week. We have been looking at the periodic table, which was, brilliant, and we've been looking each week at dyads, i.e. pairing up odd combinations and seeing what the links is between them from different traditions. Tonight we're going to be exploring something slightly different. We're going to be looking at the links between all the Muslim ones, which is these light green boxes, right? So all the Muslim boxes, and their views of the nature of God. Because in Islam there's only one God, Allah. But Allah has 99 names. So we're going to be learning something about those 99 names. And then we're going to be comparing and contrasting it with basically all the other religions, but especially the pagan ones, which is the darker green ones up here. Things like Druidry and, all the other different pagan religions, which have a notion of many gods. The pagan religions believe that God is multiple, plural. Like the ancient Greeks, there's Apollo and Dionysus, there's Zeus and Hermes and whatever. The Roman religion also had pagan pluralism. So did the Egyptian. There's Osiris and Geb, and so on and so on. Now, as a tool, we're going to be using this wonderful chart of the 99 names of God, which we've got. And I'm going to be using the set of the Tarot of the Gods that I had designed and made by my friend visiting here. So this is the Tarot set of the Gods, of which there are 78 different gods, all beautifully painted and illustrated. Sorry. So that's the protocol. We're going to see if there's a link between the names of God and the Tarot of the Gods. I think intuitively there is, and I think they marry up pretty well, but we're going to this is an experiment in interfaith dialogue, let's say. And I hope that any Muslim listening to this, any Sufi, any Ismaili, anyone from the Islamic faith will understand that this is intended with great, intellectual piety, let's call it. It's based on years and years of study, but it's also based on faith and spiritual intuition. And I hope that any pagans listening, any Druids, any people from the indigenous religions, the shamanic religions, can learn from this that Islam is not a threat, that Islam is not an enemy, Islam is not the other that we have to conquer and colonize and all that. That was very 19th century. No, Islam is an ideal that we should all aspire to surrender our egos to the divine. And what better way than learning about the qualities of the divine? Because there's far too much egotism in the world, causing all the problems in a national and an international and a personal sphere. And so anyway, that's the plan, right? Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to share a couple of books, as I normally do, I have a very large library of books on Islam that I use for my commentary on the Quran. So I'm basing this on 10 years of study, which led to the commentary on the Quran, which at the moment only exists in oral form. It's never been typed up. And any volunteers that listening want to come here and work for, as long as it takes to type it all up, very much appreciated. You get full room and board and pampering, foot massages, and you just have to type up the Quran commentary, which is, I think it would fill this whole table. It would be about 30 volumes once typed up. But it's all in my mind. Okay, so this is my copy of the Quran that I used for the commentary as my go-to, the translation by Yusuf Ali, which I've had ever since I was like 23 in Canada when I first read it. Amazing commentary and text. Then I have the most beautiful names, which is I'll be using because these 99 names are called the most beautiful names in Islamic thought. I'm going to be using the Study Quran, which is a more recent translation and commentary on the Quran. It wasn't around when I was doing my commentary. And it's edited by Syed Hussein Nasra, who's professor of Islamic science at Harvard, who I've met. He's a great intellectual, one of the greatest Islamic philosophers on the planet. I believe he would appreciate what I'm going to be saying this evening. And I'll be using perhaps some of that. I'll also be using this, which is a very important philosophical work by a sort of Sufi brotherhood called the Brethren of Purity. It was written in only a couple of centuries after Muhammad's death. And it's a series of letters from the Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity, who really integrated Islamic thought with Greek Neoplatonism. And they obviously had studied Greek philosophy at a very, very deep level, and Greek science. And they were integrating and saying, oi, knowledge is one, there's a divine unity. But that doesn't mean that Plato and Aristotle were wrong. What they said was amazing. We should learn from them and integrate it with the Quran. So, I've used that a lot in my studies. This is a book of all the Sufis and sages of Islam by an old friend of mine, Hassan Askari, who unfortunately is no longer with us. I met him several times. We worked together on various projects. He was a very great Sufi who wanted to marry Sufism with humanism and Western scholarship, as I do. Then I might be drawing on The Splendour of the True, a selection of books, of writings by Fritjof Schuon, who's probably one of the greatest Sufis in the West of the 20th century. He lived in Switzerland, ended up in America. He was, I think, originally French-Swiss, spoke French, German, English, Arabic, spent many years studying, like I've done, the Quran in depth. Was a really deep thinker. And might call on him. I might call on my colleague and friend Stephen Herstenstein's book called The Unlimited Mercifier, The Spiritual Life and Thought of Ibn Arabi, who is, by all accounts and agreement, one of the greatest Sufi sheikhs of all time. He's called the Sheikh of Sheikhs. Ibn Arabi was from Cordoba, which I visited several times for academic events. I've written about Ibn Arabi, and he did his own work and commentaries on the Quran, very great man, and he wrote commentaries on the 99 Names of God. A lot of his work's never been translated into English. He's buried in Damascus, and one of the reasons I work so hard for peace in the Middle East is I want these saints to lie in peace. Then there's the A to Z of Sufism, another very good dictionary, edited by John Renard, which gives lots of information about initiations and Sufism in different countries. And then this is one of the famous texts of Ibn Arabi, Whoso knoweth himself, knoweth his Lord. This is published by Bashara Publications, who was founded by a chap called Bullet Ralph, who was living up in Scotland. He founded the Bashara Centre, which I've given talks at, and the Ibn Arabi Society, involved with them, and it's run by some Sufi friends of mine who study Ibn Arabi's work in great detail. Bullet is buried up there on a hill overlooking Chisholm House, as it's called. So I hope that they will enjoy what I'm about to say. And then finally I want to share my Dictionary of Islam by Thomas Hughes. I brought this all the way back from India. Whenever I go to India, I come back with my coats stuffed with pockets full of books. And this is amazing. It was produced actually in the 19th century by a British Christian thinker. But, scholarship in the 19th century in the English language was pretty intense. And he was an amazing guy. It's called the Cyclopedia of their doctrines, rites, ceremonies and customs, together with the technical and theological terms of the Islamic religion. And it was first published in 1885 in the Victorian era. And this guy really did his homework. He obviously knew Muslims all over India, and he was a proper Islamic, Islamologist, if you want, a scholar. And he writes about the 99 names. So I love his dictionary. So anyway, all these books I may consult, but we'll see as we progress. And then finally, the other two to say, the main ones I'll be using are the Tarot of the Gods, 2 volumes. This is what it looks like physically. This is available. It's 1,000 pages in total, 2 volumes. And each of the 78 Gods has got like a long chapter of 10 or 15 pages in which I explore their meaning in theology and mythology, but then I explore what they mean if you draw that card, as an oracle. It's a serious work. It's the first time anyone's done a tarot of the gods. You can buy in all the New Age shops of Glastonbury and San Francisco tarots of the goddess. There's lots of them. But I thought it's time to balance that with the masculine. Much as I'm a devotee of the goddess, I think the best way we can be devotees of the goddess is to be strong masculine, devotees. Otherwise, what can you be a devotee with if not your masculinity? So Tarot of the Gods is going to be contrasted with the names of God. Okay? Right, so that's my introduction. I hope that makes sense. And it's over to you to choose the first of the names of God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Randomly, the first name is the Forgiver.
Yeah, I love that one. Yes, the Forgiveness, the Forgiver. This is a beautiful name of God, because Islam is about mercy. People don't realise that. God doesn't, people have this idea that that God is all about like punishment and judgment. But actually, Al-Ghafar, the forgiving one, is the innermost nature of God. We all make mistakes. We've all done things wrong in our lives. We've all cut corners, maybe hurt people by mistake. Some people even do that on purpose. And if you turn to God, this is the theory behind these 99 names, then you will find forgiveness there. One thing we should always remember about Islam is that Muhammad was very, very much inspired by Jesus and the innermost teachings of Gnostic Christianity. We know that Jesus loved forgiveness. There are many parts of the New Testament he talks about forgiveness. How many times am I supposed to forgive, his disciples said? 5 times, 7 times, 10 times? No, 99 times, I think, is the answer. A lot of times you've got to keep forgiving. So forgiveness as a spiritual practice is implicit in this name. Al-Ghafar is the one who accepts repentance and forgives. If one is guilty of the disruption of harmony within oneself and around oneself, which is perhaps the greatest sin, and one realises, wills and begs God's help not to do it again, then God can forgive. There are many instances we know of Christ offering this forgiveness. And one of the reasons that the establishment rabbi hierarchy didn't like Christ is he said he had the power to forgive people's sins. And he was able to do that. And they resented that because in the official hierarchy of religious dogma, you have to go through certain protocols. You have to go to confession and see the priest, or you have to pay a fine, or you have to go to in the Hebrew religion in Christ's day, you had to kill a pigeon in a sacrificial sacrifice, and if it was a really big sin, you had to kill a goat, and that would take the sin from you. Christ was teaching the interior forgiveness that's needed. Right. And to be a servant of God in the form of forgiveness, you call yourself Abd al-Ghafar, which is a name in Islam, which is a servant of the forgiving one. I hope we all are, I think one of the problems with conflict, as I've seen over the years, whether it's on a micro level of families quarrelling or friends falling out, or nations like Ukraine and Russia, is it's very difficult to get them to a place of mutual forgiveness. Where do we go? How much blood has to be spilled? How many battles have to be won and fought and lost? I think we can cut through and get there sooner before more blood is shed. That would be my hope. all the tyrants and the cruel murderers of history have to do is they have to just repent, without which there can be no forgiveness. That's quite clear in Islam. You can't just sort of pretend. You have to actually genuinely repent and commune with God, and then the forgiveness comes. In Islam, by the way, one of the big revolutionary things is there's no priesthood as such. Every Muslim is equidistant from God. So you don't confess to a priest or an imam. You confess direct to God. You don't need to go through a medium. It might help to talk to a friend who knows the details and maybe has done a commentary on the Quran or whatever, or knows the Islamic law in depth, then yeah, that's fine. But the actual act of repentance and forgiveness is between you and the Creator. And that will depend on your understanding of that. And it operates even if you're not a Muslim. You see, these names of God are universal. Forgiveness is, I think, a pretty universal cultural, intellectual, psychological thing. I mean, I'd love, in my dictionary of philosophical terms, I've got the words for forgiveness in quite a lot of languages. I mean, Hopi, Indian, Celtic, Druid, Sanskrit, they all have something for forgiveness. So they're all what we're talking about. Right. So, thank you. Now, which deity in the tarot gods is going to be in charge of forgiveness? That is a very interesting question. Now, I'm scanning down the list. Yes, it would be, I think, a deity involved with the emotions. I think forgiveness is a sort of emotional transformation that happens. And that's the suit of water in the tarot of the gods. And involves a sort of a coming to wholeness, like a healing, I would say. Yes, it's, well, okay. There are two cards that occur to me as possible here. The Ten of Water is actually the card for Jesus Christ, who many people say is the Son of God, divine. Now, although Islam won't accept that language, I think it's a disturbance of grammatical categories. To apply Chomsky's approach here, it's a sort of grammatical misunderstanding between the people that say Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the people that say, no, he wasn't. God doesn't have sons. I mean, it's a metaphorical sort of way of talking. And as I've explained in my, in former talks and so on, commentary on a book called The Key to Immortality, or The Immortality Key, by Brian Murarescu, many of the early Christians thought Jesus was the same as Dionysus, who was the Son of God, and whose mysteries brought forgiveness. So I'm going to say the other God that I would like to say is the God of forgiveness is in fact Dionysus. And Dionysus is the six of earth. And so, and has the quality of forgiveness, because Dionysus is the god that you turn to in ancient Greek if you'd done something bad, realised, and really wanted to get free of that sin, that pain you were carrying around. You'd have to do the mysteries. There's no like halfway house, and that meant, putting yourself before God and seeking forgiveness. So yes, I would associate Dionysus with forgiveness and also Jesus Christ. And I would say they are effectively, in terms of archetypes, they're the same God. Okay, so that's our first one, right?
Okay.
Hang on, let me just make a note of these because this is interesting. Right, choose your next one.
The self-sufficient.
Can you point to it?
Over here.
The self-sufficient, right. Excellent. Okay. Now, there's different ways of translating that. It could be the self-existing one, al-qayyum. I think that's the one, which is al-qayyum is the self-existing one, or the self-sufficient, number 82. So, what Islam says about this quality of God is that God is self-originating, right? He's the ever self-existing one, around which all the rest of existence depends. So in philosophy we talk about the infinite regress. If you know, where's the first cause? Aristotle talked about God as the first cause of everything. The universe as we know it is, there's a chain of causes that, you know, if I light the candle, it burns. If I start the camera, it starts. Everything in existence, in motion, is caused by something prior. So I've just driven here, you know, walked here, whatever. And you can trace the chain of causes all the way back, right, to our parents, our grandparents, to the formation of this village in the 12th century, and so on and so on. Even to the formation of this planet, and then further back, which is about 4,000 million years ago, 4.6 billion years ago. And then we can go further back and so on. But according to Islam, there's got to be somewhere where it stops. There's got to be an originator, a primal cause, a first cause, and that one has to be self-creating. It doesn't have a cause. In other words, there was no anterior being to Allah. Allah is the first cause. And that's why the Muslims liked Aristotle when they read him, because he sort of worked out the same thing. For Aristotle, there has to be a first cause, which is what he talks about in the Metaphysics. And he uses the term theos for God. It's the same word as Allah, it's just a different language. There's a primal theos, out of which everything else comes tumbling forth later on. What would it look like? Well, if we're talking physics, it would be whatever existed before the Big Bang. You know, and my friend Mandy Khan calls it the primal thought, the first thought of being, which is actually peace. And we're teaching a peace class together about that. You know, it's the divine mind, or the divine intelligence, that thought up the Big Bang into being, would be another way of saying it. But it itself is Aristotle called it the unmoved mover. That's another way of trying to describe this paradox. It's the self-sufficient originator of everything. And of course, you know, atheists say, well, there isn't such a thing. You know, prove it. Hume, who was a very arrogant sort of atheist type, said, well, there's no evidence for that. I'm not going to believe that. You know, well, okay, Hume. You know, I mean, the problem with people like Hume is they haven't taken the leap of surrender. They haven't done that. They haven't realised that spiritually we have to actually take a leap of surrender to that extraordinary cause and source of all being. They kind of put their intellect higher than the entirety of the universe, which, I mean, I think, you know, in Hume's day they didn't realise quite how big the universe was. We can cut him a bit of slack, but I think Rousseau was a wiser thinker myself. They fell out big time, Hume and Rousseau. I'm on Rousseau's side, because he did realise there is a supreme being, and he surrendered his ego accordingly. So Al-Qayyum, yeah, the self-existing one, upon whom the existence of all else depends. Right, now what god would that be associated with? Well, I think one has to come to Brahma in the Hindu theology, otherwise known as Prajapati, who's the king of air in the Tarot of the Gods. Interestingly enough, you see, in Hinduism and Hindu philosophy, which is what I've studied and taught, Brahma is the self-originating cause of everything. And that's why he's the king of the air, because the air is like invisible, you can't see it. So Brahma, you can't see Brahma. And also Brahma has absolutely no temples anywhere in India. Normal Hindus don't worship Brahma because he's not exciting enough. He's like, why do we want to worship Brahma? That was ages ago, it's not fun. Well, he is the self-created, self-subsistent, absolute, out of which all the other gods come. And the Hindu scriptures tell us this in the Upanishads, which is the most intellectually vibrant bit of Hinduism. Unfortunately, Hindu nationalists don't really read this stuff anymore. They read the kind of, let's all kill the enemy because we are Hindus and we hate Muslims, or we hate Christians. That is the kindergarten of Hinduism, which makes it out that it's a sort of a war cry, a nationalist nonsense. No, true Hinduism worships Brahma, the source. And that's why the sages of India are called Brahmins. They keep their souls surrendered to that absolute. And so they don't get distracted by the trinkets and nonsense, and especially the violence of mobbism and otherness, because they know that everything is a unity. Everything goes back to Brahma, where it starts. So the Brahmins are sworn to non-violence, true Brahmins. I don't know if there's any left in India. It seems to have been taken over by nutters, all associated with Modi and his BJP and the RSS, who are fanatical Hindu nationalists, who are worshipping the baubles and a freak show of fake deification, and they've been weaponized into hating Muslims. Well, okay, so let's try and marry up this at a very deep level of theological thinking. Why every Hindu in India should put their weapons down and stop attacking Muslims. Every Muslim should put their weapon down and stop attacking Hindus. And they should realise, and they should go back to school and start studying Brahma. Every Hindu and every Muslim should read the Upanishads, because it was the rishis of old worked this out. There is something that is prior to everything else. And that deity, Brahma, has no qualities, no colour, no shape, no size, it's the absolute. The buck stops there. And the journey of the Brahmin or the sage or the seer or the rishi is to find Brahman, is to find that deity Brahma, to give the name of the deity, but it's Brahmin in the sort of abstract concept, which dwells inside us. This is the miracle of what Hinduism discovered, is Brahma is actually resident in everyone's heart, in you and me and everyone, whether you're a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, anything. It's our intelligence that is Brahma, operative. And so in the Upanishads, and I've done a commentary on the Upanishads, you can hear on my Green University, I've done a commentary on one of the biggest of these texts, which date from about 800 BC. It's how to find that absolute. So that's the good news, really. There should be no wars and quarrels between Hindus and Muslims, and that's why, at its best, in the days of when intelligent people were running the country, when the Congress Party was, or when the British were, or when the Mughals were, all of whom had some genius people involved, they knew this, and that's why Gandhi fasted to death to prevent Hindus and Muslims rioting and killing each other, because he was a man who'd surrendered to the absolute, whether you call it Brahma or Allah, it's the same thing. And that's what the Sikhs realised. That's why Guru Nanak founded the Sikhs, which means students. In the Punjab, I'd been to where he founded them, he said there is no Hindu or Muslim. There is just the absolute. There's the Lord. And that's what we should focus on. And, you know, these amazing teachings came out of it, poetry. So, thank you. That's a good marriage, I would say, between the self-sufficient one, the absolute, and Brahma or Prajapati.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's go on. What's the next one?
Okay. The wise.
Right. Well, as a philosopher, of course, I like the wise. This is one of the many amazing names of God. I mean, each of these names one could write a whole thesis on. You know, the thing about Islam and Islamic thought is it really values wisdom. You know, the sage in Islam is called the Hakim, which means one who can download that wisdom into themselves, who can find that wisdom within the divine mind. So it's the same as the Kabbalistic term Chokhmah, which in the Kabbalistic Sephiroth means wisdom. And it's the second to the top of the Sephiroth in the Kabbalistic formulas. Al-Hakim, the wise, or the perfectly wise, is therefore a really important name of God. I really like the fact that God is wise because, you know, this world is really in trouble, isn't it? There's a lot of really crooked and evil people in power that shouldn't be there. At least one of them's gone down, Boris Johnson. At least Trump's heading for jail. But we've had to suffer these idiots for too long. Putin is still the master of Russia in his own mind and causing mayhem. You know, why do these ignorant people get to rule parts of this earth? Why is the Chinese Communist Party still spying on Tibetan monks and torturing them? Is that wise? Of course not. It's a desecration of the divine image that is within all of us. We should respect and appreciate that divine image inside all of us. Just as it's in me, it's in you, it's in everyone. And so therefore democracy and human rights and courtesy should be standard, but they're not. So, you know, I really want to complain to someone, and I'm going to complain to God when we meet after this life experience of mine is over and I'm tested for what I did in this world. You know, I'm going to say, well, I did what I could, but you gave me a pretty rough hand. I mean, humanity's really a bit up the creek here. So I don't know. You know, there are philosophical questions it's called theodicy, which is if God is so wise, Leibniz asked these questions. If God is really that wise, why did he create evil? Why did he create, you know, Putin? Why did he create Hitler? Why did he let the Holocaust happen? The traditional response in Islamic and Christian and Jewish thought is to say, the trouble is that God decided to give us humans free will because he wanted us to figure stuff out for ourselves. Instead of like watching every little step we make, like babies, he let us go out and play. And of course then we do some wrong stuff. And so we attack each other and we get into fights and all the rest of it, like children do. But eventually we come back onto the straight and narrow and realise that wrongdoing, evil, let's call it, unethical behaviour is unwise because it leads to karmic reparations. This is what the Hindu sages realised and the Buddhist, that if you do evil to others, they tend to do it back to you.